Oh, there it is. Good morning, sun. And a new day has begun with the sun disk visible coming over a huge bank of clouds sometimes in our lives. Huge banks of clouds. Let's go up a little bit north today. Since the sun is very high, we'll be able to see it all the time, no matter what vegetation is there. Yesterday was an incredibly full day after the earlier live streams. Baptismal renewal for a group of visitors. And then the day kept rolling as usual here with every time changes of schedules and delays with groups and the typical menu of serving pilgrimages until late last night. It's beautiful to see so many people come. We had about 100, well, a little less than 100 people from Spain come last night, late in the evening for adoration. We had, and the last couple of days, groups of Chinese people coming. I find that very interesting. And yesterday afternoon's Chinese group was a group of medical people who were doing some advanced studies here in the Afula area, which is a little bit south of Nazareth, a little bit north of the West Bank, and between Mount Tabor, so to say, and Megiddo in the Jezreel Plain. And it was interesting because I could speak to them because they knew some English. It wasn't easy, but we were able to communicate. And that was very, very, very interesting. And they had smiles and they had interest, and they wanted to take some pictures together. There were connections, there were bonds, human bonds, you know. And they were from all over China. Medical people, professionals, doctors. Well, I find that very interesting, you know. And sometimes there's a lot of rhetoric out there. People need to meet people. A lot of the media lives on sensationalism because it's driven by market forces. And somehow we have an interest in the negative stuff. I'm trying to identify this purple heron that just squawked around. Oh, there's another one right here, just a couple of yards from us. Let's see how long this one will stay here in front of us. Look, right there in the very center of the screen, that big, dark form is a purple heron, I think. Yes, look. Look, I'm fully zoomed in. I'm as close now as I ever remember being. Whoa. So it skipped away on me. It's hard when the camera is zoomed. There it is. I'm not sure if it's a he or a she. I don't know how to distinguish purple heron he's and she's. They have such an incredible wingspan and also a body length from the tip of their beak to their tail when they're flat, stretched out. Those marvelous creatures. So the media becomes a business, and they're employees, and they're all kinds of promoters and organizers and producers and film crews and writers and a lot of salaries to be paid for. And then that needs a lot of revenue, and revenue comes from advertising, but more people watch, and therefore there's more advertising reach if the stories are negative, if there are big tensions and dramas. And we understand that dynamic, you know, that happens. Oh boy, there was two more big blue herons. What did I call them? Purple herons, right? So then the dynamic is have tension, have big dramas. Of course, there are also other forces at work. That's not the only force, and there's forces of greed and power. And then there are sometimes party type of politics where the primary good is not to serve the people, but it's to get the party in power, or to keep the party in power. And sometimes in the real good is sacrificed, because if the other party has a good idea, it can't be used, because we have to beat that party and keep them out of power, get them into power, or keep them in power. And so we can't work together, because we'd be giving opportunity to those who are of the other camp to oust us, to have leverage against us. And that's a big challenge for the democratic system in its present-day development in many countries, you know. So when we meet peoples of other countries, sometimes there's a lot of prior hostility in the air. But the people are people. And they're normal people, and they can have headaches and toothaches and belly aches, and they can have challenges in their family life and their relationships. They have children, they have illnesses, they have bereavements, they have marriages, births, you know, all what goes on in the makeup of life. And to recognize that and to be able to relate to people, no matter what their background story that was told to us might be, to open our hearts for the people we meet, and especially if they have a particular need that needs help, needs to be addressed. And today we have very family type of dynamics and chemistry going on in the book of Genesis. And it's interesting that we had so many chapters on Abraham. We only really have one story, two stories about Isaac. His marriage story yesterday. Well, obviously he's at the other end of the sacrifice of Isaac story. And then we have, and also the big story about his birth, you know, that the expectation for him. So maybe there's more stories about Isaac, come to think of it. But really, we don't see him as a protagonist very much. And in a certain sense today, his last appearance, I think, his protagonism is actually passive. He's giving the blessing, the family blessing, the patriarchal blessing, but he's been cheated. And there's cunning, and again selfish interest. But this is the humanity God has to work with. He doesn't have a squadron of angels here. I met a guy yesterday called Kochav, and that means star. You know, regular, wonderful guy. We had a great chat. So, not everybody is a star and visible. And so the big story is about Abraham in Genesis. One of the big stories, you know, and Abraham's our father in the faith. And we do remember Isaac and Jacob, but really the big story is Abraham. And sometimes in our lives, to learn to be a generational link and to fulfill our role as a generational link without being the one in the limelight, without being the one that gets all the attention, to fulfill the role of my generation. What's the role of my generation? There was a generation that discovered America. There was a generation that developed IT. There was a generation that started the railways. And afterwards we used them generation after generation. It was a generation that started human flight, and we use it generation after generation. And so we have a generational task to hand on the faith we received. And Isaac hands on the blessing and the promise to Jacob. It was supposed to come to Esau, according to the normal human scheme of things. But God is able to work with human cunning as well. He's able to let that play into his plan, just like he is able to let the criminality of Jacob's sons not be the end of the road, because Joseph will turn out to be redemption for them in times of famine. It's interesting how God plays. Maybe somebody's cheated out of an inheritance. You know, it's terrible when somebody passes away, parents pass away, and the children fight over an armchair, and they are bigger things, obviously. But they can even fight over small things like an armchair, and they don't talk to each other again. And so this is part of human life, but God continues to bless you if you're, let's say, you're on the wrong side of that deal. Well, what's the wrong side of that deal? It's better to give the armchair away and keep the family relationship. To keep a good relationship with siblings, who cares? Even give a house away, who cares? Okay, a little bit of injustice, but don't harbor too much grudge. Life isn't worth it. And eternal life certainly not worth it. There's too much greatness and value in our lives to fight over material things. We are forever, shining stars forever. It's great to see Isaac there in that way, fulfilling his role. He didn't have any major accomplishments. But his major accomplishment was handing on the promise, handing on the blessing. To be able to hand on the blessing, to hand on the promise, to hand on the gift of salvation, generation to generation. And that's a challenge in our times. It takes a bit of learning to follow these birds when they're flying. And then the big gospel story is very interesting because Jesus is using biblical imagery to describe himself. He does it a little bit indirectly, but also really directly in the context. So he's presented as the spouse, as the groom. The groom, a spousal relationship. And spouses means marriage. And he's the groom of the people, and that's an ancient biblical image. When God says, I will espouse my people, and the prophets use this language a lot. The Song of Songs is a resonance of this great understanding and insight. So let's leave it like that for today, people. Again, it's a family image. It's amazing how God communicates his love to us and his closeness and his interest to us through spousal imagery. And there's the great culture of building marriage and family life as a reflection of God, showing the light of God hitting into our world. People, God bless you. See you later, alligators.